Welcome to the M6P Back to Books. I'm your host, Jared, and we've got Tim, John, and Kevin, and we're going to be talking X-Men Days of Future Past, an X-Men classic. It's got all the drama, all the action, everything that you could want. Or does it? That's what we're going to be talking about today. The four of us have reread this classic storyline, and we're going to let you know, is it an M? A masterpiece? Is it about a 6 or is it a P and it's just pathetic? So let's get started off with a little bit of a summary of X-Men, and these are two issues: Uncanny X-Men issue number 141 and 142. There's some time travel that's kind of introduced. It's one of the first things that's really happened in books at that time. There wasn't a whole lot of time traveling that was happening, let alone time traveling that was really having significance. And we see the dystopian future of 2013 taken over by the Sentinels, and mutants and superhumans mostly killed, except for a small ragtag group of X-Men. They decide to not transport, I guess mentally transport Kitty Pryde to the past in 1980, and she arrives there to stop an assassin from killing Senator Robert Kelly. The story goes back and forth. We're introduced to brand new characters that are now legends in the X-Men universe, and we see plot lines that are still talked about today. That pretty decent summary, guys, that I kind of overall. Okay, all right, cool. So, John, Mr. Coughlin, what were your initial thoughts about this? Tell me about you and your experience with X-Men 141 and 142.
I can't remember the first time that I read it. It was probably rereading all of Claremont's run a few years ago. It was probably the first time that I read both issues. They're not collected in a lot of places. But I mean, it's had such an influence. I mean, the movie was based on it. I really like the way they did the time travel using their mutant telepathic powers from a girl at the time only known as Rachel, right? And we find out later that's Rachel Summers, but she sends Kitty Pryde's mind back in time into her younger body because, and you would think, because they did in the movie, they used Wolverine with the same trick, except Shadowcat did it, which made no sense. And but Kitty Pryde, because she had just joined the X-Men a few issues before this, she wasn't trained to defend against psychic attacks, so she was the only one whose brain they could send back. So I like that. I like the stark contrast between the dystopian future and the bright and sunny 1980 present. A lot of great themes that are touched on, a lot of great characters introduced. We got the first shot of Nightcrawler and Mystique saying, "Oh, you're not the only one who's blue, and why don't you go ask your mama about that?" And it was, a cliffhanger for years in there, and a lot of great stuff. It was clearly Chris Claremont and John Byrne at the top of their games, and near the end of their X-Men run, which is, for many reasons, always claimed to be one of the best, and I have to agree with that.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that. This is kind of the first mention of a Joe Mama joke, you know? It was Mystique and Nightcrawler, and
Yeah,
Claremont doesn't get enough credit for it.
right.
That's crazy. Well, Mr. Nerd Champs down there, Tim, what were your impressions of Uncanny X-Men Days of Future Past?
Uh, like full disclosure, I definitely have not read this since at least high school, so it was a nice refresher. There's no doubt about it. I read the Uncanny X-Men from the time I was about 8 or 9 to the time I was about 18, 19. So I can tell you that when I probably came along issue 141 and I saw that it was a kitty story, which you open up to page 1 and it's very clearly a kitty story, I probably just threw that one aside and moved on to 142, where I saw the full roster of X-Men. And it was very, very clear that there was a battle between them and the Brotherhood. That's probably where I picked up if I was 11, 12 years old. That's probably what I did. Going back and looking at it, there are a few things that I just absolutely loved. I do love that we had that epic battle between the X-Men and the Brotherhood. That was great. I think there was a lot of good stuff there. That's classic that's classic roster versus roster, which I really appreciated in this run. That's something that I really loved in the Uncanny X-Men run, is when you got 4 or 5 good guys against 4 or 5 bad guys, and it's never the same guys, and you never know who's going to be the weak link in the battle, and it always was a very fun thing. So I really enjoyed that. That was a great thing. I also enjoyed the tease with Nightcrawler and Mystique. That was great. Mystique getting away at the end, she was kind of the bailout villain. She always could kind of get away, just like Ultron could always kind of get away, and a couple others could always get away. So that was definitely something that was kind of a thing. There were a couple things that I did want to mention that I didn't, 10 or 12-year-old Tim probably didn't realize this, but going back and rereading it, Claremont at the time, you don't think about it, but a lot of people were not overwhelmingly familiar with these characters. And it's kind of interesting how he had to use the dialogue as commentary. I always thought that was very interesting in the Uncanny X-Men. And honestly, when I was reading it initially, when I was younger, I would just skip over a lot of that stuff. I would skip over the paragraphs. Wolverine would go up to someone and slash in battle and say, "These are my retractable adamantium claws," and all that. But that's something that you needed to do at the time, because they weren't as big in pop culture. People weren't familiar with the characters. You never knew who was going to pick up the comic book. And so I always wondered, was that a Claremont thing, or was that kind of an era thing? And I think it's very clearly an era thing. I read a Claremont run last year. I read Wolverine Deep Cut, and it wasn't like that. So it was one of those things. It was kind of interesting to kind of see what you had to explain to people back then that you don't have to explain to people now. The other thing was kind of the transitions between stories were not super connective. I always thought that was kind of interesting. That was true throughout the entire Uncanny run. And I don't know if that was really Claremont. I'm starting to think it probably was a little bit more than it was just going storyboard and picking the best ones. But the story immediately before this one was the one where Nightcrawler and Wolverine went up to Canada to tell Alpha Flight that Wolverine wasn't going to be part of Alpha Flight anymore. And then while they were up there, they ran into some trouble with Wendigo, and that was basically the gist of the comic. And then the last panel of that one is the Blob escaping from prison, and then it's like Days of Future Past. It's not super connective. There really wasn't a lot there. You probably could have led into that story a little bit more. But yeah, for the most part, the story itself is timeless. It's something that does work. It's like John was talking about, introductions to characters that we hadn't seen before, and a lot of little teasers with things that would be coming in the future that would kind of be dangling out there for decades, and that we still have questions about. So it's a really good run, really good story. I appreciated it, and yeah, definitely enjoyed rereading it. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, wow, you got a lot crammed in there. We could talk about just what you had to say for the whole episode.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Just you look at the first, like Claremont just really put the X-Men through their paces, right? From probably like issue 100 up to 175, 180. It's nonstop. They're never just laying around and sitting around eating spaghetti or anything. It's always something huge and colossal. And it was one good story after the next good story. They're just coming off the Dark Phoenix here.
Right.
Dark Phoenix just happened.
Exactly.
Cyclops pieced out. Wolverine ditched his costume, and now he's wearing this brown and orange thing that nobody liked at the time. We got Alpha Flight here. Now this Blob shows up, who was an original member, even like the Brotherhood. If you look at today's comics, maybe it's from my cynical 40-year-old self, but today's books, if I was reading an X-Men book and they give me one character that I kind of know from Ms. Marvel, Mystique, and then this character from like 20 years ago, Blob, and then they introduce Pyro and Destiny and Avalanche, and they tell me this is the Brotherhood, I feel like this would be when I'd be on Facebook ranting and raving, like, this is ridiculous, and it's woke, and I hate it, and even like the use of Kate Pryde. If you have a new X-Men character, only here for like 10 issues, and now they're the focal point, and they save the day, I would be upset today. So I feel like this reread has made me relook at Jared. Like, who is Jared, and where does he exist in the Marvel universe? Maybe he's more curmudgeon than I thought he was. You know? All right, Kevin, our voice of reason.
So, first to answer Tim's question, during this period, you're getting at the tail end of an editorial edict that every comic could be someone's first comic. And so that's
Exactly.
why you're getting the writing style that you're getting. It's a carryover from Stan Lee. It starts to phase out right around this time. So you start losing that, but you know,
Mhm.
Claremont sticks on to that pretty much until his end of the run of X-Men, which has always been a sore spot for me. You
Mhm.
don't necessarily get that from other writers in this period. Um, so I can't remember the first time I read it, and I was looking it up, and I was like, I must have picked it up in X-Men Classic or something like that. It was never even
Mhm.
in X-Men Classic. It was never printed there. They skipped over these two issues in
Mhm.
X-Men Classic. And I was like, so I really don't know when the first time was I've read it, but I've read it several times before. Um, one thing I've always, stuck with me is that this story, the present time, right? So the 1980 storyline takes place 2 days before I was actually born. So that's what's going on here. That's how old I am and how old this comic is. Um, so I've always liked it. I think one of the best things, and I think especially in issue 142, is the structure of the plotting that Claremont lays out. Because what you get is you get present day, and then you get this subversive action in the future where they're trying to break into the Baxter building, and so you're getting this back and forth, and Claremont is really able to use that. If this is your first time reading this and you're not really familiar with comics, it ratchets up the tension because you don't, you're leaving this scene where you're invested in this battle and you're entering this other scene. Well, you know these characters this is the future state of them, and you're invested in them, and then he leaves them in a perilous state, and it goes back to the past. And he does this like I think the pacing and just the plotting, the way he structures that entire issue is is really phenomenal. And I think I think it's really unparalleled, especially at this time. I have a lot of issues with his dialogue and the way he writes dialogue. Jared and I've gone back on this so many times before. It's one of the reasons why I've never really sat down and read like all of his Uncanny Run. I've read very specific arcs and very specific issues, but not the whole thing, and that's the reason why. But I do think if you like the X-Men, if you're interested in them, I think this is the phenomenal two issues. And again, if you don't know anything about these characters because of the way they're writing at this time, you're given all the information you could ever possibly want about these characters. And I think that's good. I think it's encouraging. I think we could use a little bit of more. I don't want that much, but I think we could use a little bit of that again in our modern times. I was thinking about the latest Nova Centurion issue, number 4. It introduced this character who stole Nova's ship. It was just an issue that came out last month. And they acted like this is a character that we should all know about. And I went and I had to dig online. He's been like one other issue or something like that. But there's nothing given to let us know who this character is, where he's been before, why is he important to this storyline, and why we should care about him at all. It's just introduced that you should know who this character is, and yeah. So I think we could use a little bit of that, in this modern day and age. Yeah, I think that's enough for now.
Cool. Yeah. Well, Kevin's a little under the weather. We'll let him have some water and some tea and rest his voice because he'll have more to say the rest of this episode. So it sounds like for the most part we enjoyed this. We're talking about some classic themes and things, but the 8 and 9 year old Tim is different than the 40-year-old Tim. So looking at this, are there some things that just don't necessarily hit that well for Days of Future Past, Tim?
I mean, if I think the dialogue is the thing that jumps off the page to me. I mean, every panel is a paragraph, and that can be good because you're getting a lot of detail. But like I said, 8 or 9 year old Tim, I would just skip over it because I get the gist of what I need to know from the panel anyway. And for the most part, the thing that I don't like about it is when I was younger, I wasn't necessarily the fastest reader anyway. I was more I was like a half hour issue guy when I was 11, 12 years old. So that dialogue turned a half hour read into a 45, 50 minute read. And that's just too much for me. So that, when I was younger, that was something that was a little bit of a hurdle. I understand why they did it in the era. I understand why they did it exactly like Kevin was talking about. But yeah, that was the one thing that was kind of a little bit of a barrier here. Other than that, and the other thing is, like I said, not a huge Kitty fan, never been a huge Kitty fan. When I saw this was a Kitty story, more likely than not, I just moved on to the next issue. So um, that's the difference between 40-year-old Tim can appreciate, hey, maybe this character isn't the most exciting, but let's see what the story is and let's see what else comes from this story. So yeah.
Yeah. Without rabbit trailing too much, Tim, like a minute, 30 seconds to a minute, the disdain that I have for Kitty Pryde is very evident on the M6P Facebook page. I'd like you to share why you also share in that.
I think it's just all the stereotypical stuff. Like you said, she was kind of a newer character. She had kind of had this very minimal role previously, and now she's going to be the one that just steps up and saves the day. When we still have Wolverine, we still have Nightcrawler, we still have all these other people. It really just didn't make a lot of sense to an X-Men fan to have her be the one that is the one that saves the world. So I guess that's the main reason. I think you hit on that already and right on. I agree with it.
So is it still to this day, are you not a fan of Kitty Pryde?
Oh, I'm really not, and
Yeah.
I'm not a huge fan of Kitty, and not a huge fan of the way they've used or portrayed her in media either. So for the most part, she's one of my least favorite X-Men. But I like I said, I can still appreciate the story even though she's the main character.
Yeah, that's why Tim and I have been friends since elementary school. On a cold bus ride, we both shared our hate of Kitty Pryde from
Yeah.
the X-Men arcade game. It's a good
we
day.
we probably lamented about it to everybody that would listen to us, and that was probably nobody. But anyways,
Right. All right, Kevin, how about you? I mean, you already offered a little bit of some critique about some dialogue and some characters. Was there anything else that kind of stuck out that just, nah, that just does not fly for you?
I think considering the army base Fort Myer that's referenced is on the other side of Arlington Cemetery, and they're all the way at the Congress building. I calculated that the fight had probably been happening for about 10 minutes. I just don't buy that they're getting all the tanks out there, getting, yeah, that didn't buy for me. Um, I will say too, of all the presidents, I buy the least Jimmy Carter doing this like secretive co-op thing to I mean like he wasn't a great president, but he was a good man. Like I just don't buy that last panel with Carter in it. Luckily they keep him in shadow because I had to when I first saw it I didn't like really read carefully and I was like, oh, is this the first appearance of Stryker? No, no, supposed to be Jimmy Carter. Um, yeah, I think I think those are my really only major critiques other than the dialogue. I don't really have an issue with Kitty Pryde. My first, I think, experience with the X-Men was that uh one shot cartoon that they used to have on Fox in the morning in the middle of the 80s.
Yeah.
And it was all around Kitty Pryde. It was Welcome to the X-Men Kitty Pryde or something like that. I don't remember exactly the title of it. But I
Pride
mean
of the
that
X-Men.
Pride of the X-Men, yes. So that was my initial, introduction to
Yeah.
these characters, other than watching Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends and Iceman, I mean, these are the first
Yeah.
mutants otherwise that I knew about. So to me, she's just always has been an X-Men. And yeah, if you watch it now, she's an annoying character, but as a kid, she felt like a kid, kind of like how Jubilee is annoying if you watch the original animated series, but when we watched it, that was kind of us.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I don't really have a problem with any of the characters or anything to
Yeah.
that regard.
Sounds good, man. And John, why don't you round us out with any critiques or criticisms or what didn't fly?
Sure. A couple of things specifically. There's the panel that we talked about where Raven Darkholme Mystique is revealed to be fighting Nightcrawler as Nightcrawler, and he says some German word that I don't speak German, but I assume meant he was very surprised that it was Mystique that he was fighting when he was fighting himself. If you're an X-Men and you're fighting yourself, it's Mystique. Like you should know that. You should know that for sure. You should never be surprised that that's not really you, but it's actually Mystique. And then there was another bit about like Storm telling Wolverine not to use his claws, which I kind of get for her personality and it fits, but it's like you want to sell comics or not, Wolverine's got to have those claws out, or what are we doing here? So those are a couple of things, and then one more but I guess it's just as subject to interpretation. But the Sentinels dispatched Franklin Richards, the most powerful being in the Marvel universe, pretty easily, and I guess that's not what he was at the time because there's probably still Reed Richards had dampeners in him when he found out how powerful he was, even more so than what the Sentinels did. But he didn't give up much of a fight at all. So I would say those are my three knocks, generally to nitpick, but
Yeah.
overall, yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, the Marvel universe at that time was such a smaller universe. It was just a simpler
Right.
place.
Like all
And
those gravestones are almost all the characters, right? There's,
yeah.
I mean, and they have like a one panel, a small panel in the middle of the page with just X's over the face. And it's like everybody. There's like
Yeah.
Daredevil, the Fantastic Four, the rest of the X-Men, and a couple of the Avengers. I mean, there was really
Yeah.
that was it. Yeah.
Yeah. In these issues, we get to see the first time that these guys even meet Blob. He's like,
Right.
"Who? You're
Yeah.
not the X-Men. What are
Right.
you talking
He's like,
about?"
yeah, I only know the guy with the wings over there. Right. Yeah. The
Yeah.
angel.
And were there, I mean, had Nightcrawler met Mystique? Had he before
Right.
this?
I think that's where the surprise probably really is
Yeah. He was
supposed to
like,
be. Yeah.
I think I've heard of you. Folks have been talking in the break room about you. Are you
Right.
Mystique? Like,
Right.
and there wasn't all this back knowledge of, well, I'm actually your mother, but I'm really your father, and Destiny's actually your mother, but then I was with Azazel. Like, there's all this backstory stuff. It was simpler times.
Right.
It was the universe was more connected. I think that's why you saw that panel of this random panel of Blob breaking out of jail and leaving. In today's
Mhm.
books, they don't explain it. You're just, oh, I Blob was beat up by the Avengers last year and is in,
Right.
at the bottom of a lake or something. Oh, he's here. We don't really need an explanation. We just assume he got out. I think I kind of missed that small knit
I miss
connect.
the asterisks. Remember the asterisks? As
Ah,
seen in Amazing Spider-Man 123, this is why
Yeah.
this guy's. I thought you
yes.
Yeah,
died. Yeah, we did too. Remember back in your pal
they had
Jared or
one or
whatever
two
your
of
name
those.
is.
They had one
Yes.
Mhm.
or two of those in this two issue run, but
Yeah.
not a
Right.
lot.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but
Yeah,
one of them was just referencing the previous issue.
exactly.
So
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. And this too, my first exposure was not through the book, but through the animated series, Days of Future Past, and seeing how Jim Lee's team dealt with the Brotherhood and Bishop was there. No Kitty to be found. And then they also were able to include a more modern take on the Gambit X-Men Traitor storyline with Gambit and Bishop and kind of meld those together. And it makes me see more of the genius that I think Eric Lewald is. And I know this isn't an X-Men animated show, but those guys had no reference for the X-Men at all. They got hired to do this job. They had all the books from long boxes that they could find at their local comic book store, read everything from issue one to the current Jim Lee stuff. And they had one season and they just picked their best stories and put them together. And this one made it. And they also combined it with the traitor storyline and had no Kitty Pryde because she wasn't even allowed in the cartoon. She was the only
Yeah.
character that was not to be used. Like, that was my first exposure to this. So almost rereading this in the books is kind of an alternate take on what Days of Future Past is to me.
Yeah, and they even gave that traitor storyline a resolution, which was not in the comics for years after that. And again, to my earlier point, the resolution was, guys, Gambit, if you're killing somebody, you didn't kill him. Mystique did it. Like that's the answer. That's always the answer. It's Mystique. But
Did. We did.
right, and then the movie too was I rewatched that.
Oh, for this
I didn't.
episode.
Yeah, I just figured
Okay.
how much, and they did a lot of the similar things. They just, like we said, used Wolverine, but they went back before Wolverine joined the X-Men. And
Yeah.
I was actually, you know what, I was really surprised. I don't know why I didn't know this, is that Bryan Singer directed that one too.
Mm.
Like, I knew he did X-Men 1 and 2, left for a while. I kind of thought he got booted out of Hollywood, but I guess he was
He
still around
he
in
did
2014.
he did Apocalypse too. He did Apocalypse
Didn't
too, didn't
really?
he?
Mm.
I
Yeah,
don't know about
he didn't do Phoenix, but he did Apocalypse. Yeah.
Okay.
That's what was wrong with that movie.
Yeah, I think Bohemian Rhapsody is probably his swan song.
Yeah,
That'll
for
probably
sure.
be I think too much came out. So yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Have you guys seen X-Men Days of Future Past, the Rogues cut, the alternative version?
Hmm.
I actually enjoyed that one, I think, more than I did the theatrical cut.
I
I've only
see
seen
I
the
see why it
I've
was
only
cut
seen the movie
down.
twice.
I see why it was cut for the theatrical cut because I liked the story. I liked all the rogue stuff that was cut out, but I could see why, unless you're really a fan of these characters in this series, why,
That's true.
I get it, but I'm glad they released that cut. It was actually a better cut, in my opinion,
Yeah,
dude.
it was fun. It was fun. Let's do multiple releases of all the movies. Just whatever. How to have well with AI, we can do whatever we want. Well, that's a whole nother thing. All right. So let's rate this. Let's rate this a little bit. So we got M is for marvelous, magnificent, whatever. It's like a 10. Okay. The M6P, a 6 is a 6. It's pretty mid. And then a P is pathetic, preposterous. Another, I don't know what another P word would be, but
Poorly written. Yeah.
poorly written, poorly reviewed.
Poop.
Yes, that one. All right, so let's go backwards. Kevin, why don't you start us off, man? What would you give this?
So I am struggling a little bit because for all my praise, I don't want to encourage someone to read this and they read this and be like, "What is this?" Because the dialogue is rough, guys. If you've never read a book this old, this is rough dialogue. But with that said, I think it is. I think it is masterfully plotted. The artwork is beautiful. It's a historic comic. It's one that's important in Marvel history. So I'm going to go with an M.
All right, we got an M, Mr. Collins.
I'm also gonna go M. I'm gonna go M because you only gave me three choices, So I'm gonna go M because I do think that it is better than mid. I will say that. You've got Byrne at his best. I think everybody can appreciate what we're seeing from Byrne here. You've got Claremont, which the story, as Kevin laid out, was very, very wonderfully done, very masterfully plotted out, even though it was a kiddie story, which is one of my big complaints. The dialogue, my other big complaint. The thing I forgot was the resolution. It's like Kitty did all this stuff. She saved the day, but in the end, Guy Rick launched the Sentinel Project anyway. So it kind of is like it didn't really matter. But at the end of the day, it's a great story. It's a classic story. I've got to go with an M on it. But I think that the battle between the Brotherhood and the X-Men, as classic as you can get. That was just like the animated series come to life. It was great.
Yes. Yeah, we just missed that the building falling and Rogue saving the girl. That's the only thing we missed. All right, Cogs.
Yeah, it's definitely an M for me. I mean, if it's a Kitty Pryde story is enjoyed by two people that hate Kitty Pryde, then it's got to be a really good story. And there's no question. The other thing I really liked about it, as I'm thinking here, is like when you go to the future, you can kind of see what Claremont plotted out and a lot of the things he ended up following through because he was on the book for another, what, 10, 12 years after this. And
Yeah.
like the future, I loved this, uh, that they're maybe not their leader, but their ally is Magneto in a wheelchair, right? And he eventually, from here on, he would start turning Magneto good. Magneto was a villain, really, up to this point, a real dastardly Marvel type of villain in the old Marvel style. And from here, he became good. Um, yeah, I mean, there's just so much to like about it and to reread it in two issues, which in today's comics would be 117 issues and a couple of like strike files about who's who and where's what and where were they happening. This was two issues that reads like six because it's Claremont when every panel's a paragraph, like you say. So it's a nice medium two issues. It's not two regular issues, but it's only two issues. You can do it. So it's an M. I recommend it to anybody. And yeah, it's dated, but the future is 2013 for heaven's sake. So that's how old this is.
Could
We
you
missed
imagine
that.
if Bendis wrote this? Oh, oh.
Not the strike files, John.
Right. I think I was just looking through. I think Ultimate X-Men tried to do it, but I think Robert Kirkman was writing it then, and it was
Mm.
better than Bendis, but not as good as this. And it was at least 4 or 5 issues, which was probably
Yeah,
about the same amount of words written.
he loves exploding plots too, but at least his dialogue's good. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I would definitely give this an M as well. It is surprising that it's only 2 issues. Is it not? It's just I had a great time reading this too. It was 2 issues, but I was enjoying myself really just the next page. I read it in the Epic collection, but man, just to be excited for every page was something that I don't feel like I get. Definitely
Hmm.
not in today's comics, but it was just I'm just repeating myself now. Just and how many times like play a drinking game? How many times can Jared say just? It was just so good to read. Yeah, John is 3 sheets to the wind now. But like Tim said, you see the creme de la creme X-Men basically, outside of like Cyclops and Rogue. Like that is the team right there that cemented the X-Men in history, fighting the Brotherhood, which is the one of the best villain teams of all time. Period. End of story. Those 4 or 5 characters are just a blast to have a good time with and see them go back and forth. While there was a lot of dialogue, there wasn't sitting around doing nothing with the dialogue. There was action happening. And I don't think that today's writers necessarily mix those two together. I see a lot of sandwich eating and coffee drinking in today's books, and it's really cool to be on a cover and like your Starbucks drink and the straw is going out and you're jumping and it it's just stupid. And Claremont was like, you're gonna talk and you're gonna fight at the same time, and you're gonna work for this, 35-cent cover or whatever it is. This was a masterpiece to me. When you think of probably the 2 biggest X-Men stories in X-Men history, they all came out within a year time span. Dark Phoenix and Days of Future Past are what people just point to as the 2 X-Men stories. He was at the top of it. Chris Claremont was just at the top of his game at this time. Nothing
Right.
could no wrong. That's why he could pull all these different characters and put them in his book because the sales were going up. He was proving himself. He took this title that nobody wanted to read and made it the #1 book for Marvel, period. No.
Right. And Burn Help, you just talked about those covers. I mean, those covers, you see that cover where Wolverine and everybody's dead behind him, slain, apprehended,
Ah,
slain, apprehended. I mean, that cover 141, how many times have you seen that recreated over the years
yes.
and copied and homaged and all the other things? And then one other thing I want to say, because I know we've been going, I love that the action is sequential and that there's a lot of panels on each page. That's why you fit this big story into two. One of my favorite scenes in the whole thing, and now it would probably be a two-page splash, but it was like panel 5 of 9 on the page, right?
Yeah.
Storm dies at the top of the page. You see how mad Colossus is driven into a range, and then you just see a Sentinel flying out the side of the building. You don't even see Colossus punch him. You just know that's what happened. He punched a Sentinel straight out the Baxter building, and then the next thing, and you don't even see him die either. You just hear Rachel Summers, I know he perished kind of thing. But like those little storytellings that less is more, and we can do this in 2 issues. Maybe they had to cut out some stuff, but it kind of hit a little harder that they did, and it was done.
Very well said. Very well said. We got everybody gets 15 seconds to plug your project. Tim, what you got?
Check us out on YouTube. Me and my good friend Dan, Nerd Champs, at Nerd Champs on YouTube. Check us out.
Definitely, it's a fun show. We've all got to be on that. Kevin, have you been on Nerd Champs?
Yep. Oh yeah.
Okay.
Kevin's been on twice, I think. Yeah.
Okay. Kevin, you have anything to plug?
No, get off your device and go outside.
I like it. I like it. This somber Kevin, tea drinking somber Kevin. I love this guy. All right, John, how about you, man?
No, nothing.
Okay. All right. Well, check us out on Instagram, Facebook, all the socials on the M6P. And until next time, make yours the M6P.
Bruh.